ourselves, if you will, put your hand over your eyes. I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today.
And I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today.
Now if you just put your hand over your heart and extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today.
The spiritual truth that I'm talking about today is one that is the most challenging for me to embody. It is the one that I like the least, but in fact, if I can embody it, it will help me the most. It's one I use frequently because I need to use it frequently. And that is the spiritual truth that says we are always at choice. We are always at choice. We can see the glass half full, or we can see the glass half empty. We can see our ex as a devil or a child of God. We can see ourselves leave a job, know we have to leave a job in a huff, or we can leave it as a creative person preparing ourselves for the next great thing in our lives. We can see these earthquakes and fires as punishment from God, or we can see them Great Mother righting itself, getting itself in balance. Now, in none of these situations do we want to see ourselves as victims, but in all of those situations, we want to see ourselves as compassionate people, all in this together. I'm pleased to report that your Board of Trustees this week voted to send our July tithe of $862 to our sister church in Baton Rouge, who was demolished. The church was demolished and 12 of their families have lost everything. So we joined a group of our sister and brother churches to try and lift them up. That's a powerful thing. But in none of these situations do we see any of this as anything but a choice as to what we do next. When we can get at a deep enough level that we are always at choice, when we can get that as a key spiritual principle in our lives, we'll stop being stuck. And the truth is, at this stage, when you come to this kind of a church, you're really usually just not down and out anymore. Now you're just kind of stuck somewhere in some area of your life. Your relationship area is kind of stuck, or your financial area is a little bit stuck, and you're not penniless, but you need to move through the stuck area. When we can get this, we are always at choice. We'll be able to move ourselves through that stuck area at a much faster and happier rate. You know, I tell a story often in this church, and I'm going to keep telling it. It's a story that you could probably lip sync with me like we used to do at the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Those of you old enough to know, you'd sit there and you could probably do this with my story that I'm going to tell. But here's the thing. This story, although it's repetitious, is one I could tell myself every day and be well served, because it reminds me how foolish it is to get in this idea of that we don't have a choice, that we're victims in our life. It's this, you know, Tony Robbins, he said, repetition is the mother of skill. Repetition is the mother of skill. The story is the elephant story, in which the way they train baby elephants is they put a clamp on their ankle and they put a length of chain and stake the chain to the stake, and the elephant can only go as far as that chain will allow them to go. Day after day, day after day, day after day. They can only go as far as that chain will allow them to go. And then at some point, the trainer takes the chain away, and the elephant never goes any farther than that length of chain. They don't need the chain anymore. They have normalized themselves. They have convinced themselves that they cannot go beyond the length of the chain. And you and I have done that too. We've done that in our jobs. We've done that in our finances. We've done that in our relationships. We've done that in the courageous stories that need to be told. People in this church right now, this morning, have a story they need to tell somebody, but they're not telling them because they won't go beyond the length of that chain. They're afraid what might happen. We are always, always, always at choice. And once we get that we're always at choice, then the next thing we need oftentimes is help in making the right choice. The choice that will make us happy. I don't mean the right choice for your mother or your father or society or anybody else. I mean the choice that will make us happy. We need help in that area sometimes. So for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to go into some ancient text and begin to borrow some ancient wisdom that I think will help us make happier choices in our lives. Now you have to come to the story with the notion that you have the choice, but once you do that, I think I have some help for us in making right choices, happier choices for ourselves. Specifically, I'm going to look at the Torah, the ancient text of Judaism, sometimes called the New Testament, and the book, the Old Testament, and sometimes called, and specifically the book of Exodus. I'm going to look at the 10 Commandments. Now, most of you who grew up know in this country know that the 10 Commandments, the story is that Moses had his back up against the wall. He was having trouble with his leadership to take his people to the promised land. People had lost faith in him. And so he needed some help. And God had that help. There are people in the church this morning. Maybe you're a manager of a group of people and your back is against the wall. You need help with your leadership. Maybe you're a parent this morning who needs help with your leadership. Maybe you're in an organization and you need help with your leadership. God has help for us. God had help for Moses to get us some information for our leadership needs. Now, here's the thing. I don't mean when I say that there's a God in the sky who's going to call us up to Mount Sinai or someplace like Camp David and give us a special consultation on how to do leadership. I don't mean that. I mean that there's an energy, an essence that's filled with wisdom that is available to us 24/7. And that wisdom, we don't need anything else except for a set of ears in order to be able to experience that wisdom. There's an energy that flows through all of us all of the time. And we don't have to go any farther than our living room, than our patio, than a little piece of nature, wherever we can be still, wherever we can be quiet and listen to that wisdom that is being broadcast to us 24/7. See, the 10 Commandments were never meant to be external rules. They were always meant to be spiritual wisdoms. They were always meant to be ways for us to live. See, so many of us, those of us who grew up churched, you know, when you were sent to a kid, you got put in a dress or a little necktie, you're going to church with me today. You know, a lot of us, when we went through that experience, we came out seeing the 10 Commandments as threats. Because that's how they were positioned to us. They were threats. They were never intended to be threats for ourselves. Now, they are spiritual laws. So they're not anything. They're everything. And when I say spiritual laws, I mean we are spiritual beings governed by spiritual laws, having a human experience. And you can't just blow off the spiritual laws. They cannot be repealed. They cannot be amended. They are what they are. And we have to take them seriously. But when we get in harmony with these spiritual laws, we will naturally begin to make choices in our lives that will make us happy. Now, nobody is above the law. Nobody. No matter how much money you make, nobody's above the 10 Commandments. No matter how much influence you have in the world, no matter what your position is, you are under the influence of the 10 Commandments. Now, the danger for you and I is we can ignore the 10 Commandments. It is very possible for us to ignore the 10 Commandments, but it won't stop them from working in our lives. The law of reciprocity is working 24/7. Amen? Amen? All the time. And whatever it is that we put out will come back pressed down, multiplied, and back to us. won't just come back to us. It'll come back pressed down, multiplied, and back to us. So when we can begin to understand how that works, we begin to look at what it is that we're putting out. See, sometimes people ask me, how does the Holocaust happen? How does slavery happen? How does police violence happen? How does all this mishmash in the politics right now, how is that happening? It's happening because the majority of the mind is not looking at the 10 Commandments. The majority of the one mind is not paying attention. And individually and collectively, when we don't pay attention, when we put out, what we put out comes back to us, there are consequences to that, individually and collectively. If you are a person who grew up waiting for Judgment Day, stop waiting. It's here now. We're seeing it right now. Every day we're seeing it. Because we're not in harmony with the 10 Commandments. How simple is that? That we could change. People say, oh my God, we need sociologists, we need this, we need that, we need something else. We need to pay attention to what God's already told us. That the 10 Commandments are here for our assistance. Well, I'm going to look at the first 3 today, because they actually say pretty much the same thing. There are 3 different ways of saying the thing. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not have false gods before me. Number 2 is, thou shalt not make thee a graven image. And number 4, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. So let's start off. You know, I'm a big fan of Emmett Fox. I love Emmett Fox. And he has an interesting concept he puts forth relative to this idea of false gods. He says, it is not possible to have a false god before you. That the God you have before you right now is there by right of your consciousness. And if in fact you are looking at a God who is punishing, mean, sometimey, chooses who to bless and who not to bless, that is not a false God. That is a God of your understanding. That is a God of your consciousness. If in fact, however, you are willing to look at the God that we're learning about here at CSA, who is a God of love, a God of abundance, a God of ultimate source, a God of joy, a God of compassion, then that's the God that you will have in front of you. That will be your God. Neither are false gods. They're the God of your understanding in your life. You know, our job is not to try and make a bigger God happen. Our job is to make a bigger understanding of who God is in our life. Now, I love this image of you can't have a false God. You only can have the God that you have, that you choose to have. But I also like the poetry of false gods. I like the imagery of false gods. And probably I like it because I have had so many false gods in front of me in my life. You know, money was a false god. Cupcakes have been a false god. Jim Beam has been a false god. Relationships have been a false god. Possessions have been a false god in my life. They became false gods because I mistakenly believed they would make me happy. They would make me feel safe in my life. And I spent time that I should have been looking at what God was in my life, looking at how to gather up these false gods to make myself happy, to make myself feel safe. They became the priority instead of developing a relationship with the Spirit within me in my life. See, relationships, and when I was heavier, I thought if I lose 50 pounds, I'm going to be happy. If I win the lottery, I'm going to be happy. If I fill up this church 5 times at Sunday morning, I'm going to be happy. Those things are not what make people happy. The presence of God within us is what makes us happy. Those things are the result of getting the connection. You make the connection, the correction will take care of itself. Inside of us. When we go out there, we're wasting time. When we come in here, we begin to understand that with God, all things are added on to me. And when we begin to understand that, we shift where we're looking. We shift where we're looking. You know, I try and hold myself responsible in the evening for taking a little inventory. Where was I looking today for God? Did I have a distraction that was so great? And you know what? Don't beat yourself up. If you do, you do. And the next day you move on. There are some days my arthritis is so bad, that becomes my false God. Because that's where my attention is going. But in truth, if I could wrest my attention away from my arthritis and onto God, the arthritis will begin to take care of itself. If we look every day, have I looked today of a God of love and power and joy and connection? Is that where I've been today? You know, people come to me sometime and say, you know, Reverend Georgia, when I took foundations, I started feeling God. I love God. I felt God. I started coming here. I felt God. And now I don't feel God so much anymore. I can't find God. I don't know where God went. God didn't go anywhere. Our attention went somewhere. It's the easiest thing in the world to get your love of God back. But you have to do the work. You have to make sure that you're turning your attention to that which is God. Not to fear and lack and limitation, but to love and harmony and joy. Even if you can only find it as much as a mustard seed that day, there's somebody who gave you a smile. I know there is somewhere. There is somebody who did something. Because God can only do for us what God can do through us. So you look for people in your life. Where was I blessed today? You know, I'm studying Mary Morrissey. I love her. I think she's one of the top metaphysical teachers on the planet. And she says we must always become people of increase. People of increase. And what she means by that is if you're at the store and you see a mother that's having a trouble with a toddler, you give that mother a smile. Just a little something. An extra something. That happened to you. Somebody did that for you. Something. I don't know what it was. Make sure you don't go to sleep till you find it. And I promise you, God will be with you all night long when you find that in your life. Well, let's move on. Let's move on. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain. I'm going to just make a little confession here. I have a terrible habit of swearing. I try not to. There is nothing attractive about me swearing. Nothing. There is nothing good about it at all. There's no value in my swearing. I work at it, but I fail daily at it. I'm not good at it. So I'd like to clean that up. But that's not what this commandment is about. This commandment is not about swearing. Taking the Lord's name in vain is not about swearing. Vain means without effort. Vain means nothing. That's what it means. That you're taking the Lord's vain in nothing. And that's the sin. That's where we miss the mark. Is when we don't hold up that name of what it truly is, which is all the qualities of God you can think about. That's what, see, when you take God's name in vain, you're wasting your breath. You're wasting your breath. Because if you were to say, God doesn't love me, that's wasting your breath. It's not true. It doesn't matter whether you got out of Sacramento County Jail this morning and got in here, or you came in as a titan of industry. God loves you just the same.
Amen.
Taking God's name in vain means that we're not holding ourselves up to that which we truly are, which is a representation of spirit. So every time you say a negative thing about yourself, every time you put yourself down, I'm not smart, I can't handle money too much, I'm too sensitive, I'm this, I'm that, you've just taken God's name in vain. Because you are the representation of God on this planet. Our work is to say about ourselves and all beings on the planet who we truly are. You are beautiful. You are the future. You are love. You are connection. You are one with me. That's not taking God's name in vain. So let's move on to the last one. And the last one is, thou shalt not have graven images before me. Thou shalt not make thee a graven image. And you know, this came to us, this teaching, part historical, part allegorical, from Moses. When Moses came down from his talk with God, he found his people had reverted back to their old ways. They were worshiping a golden calf. And that's what you and I do. We revert back to our ways. When we think we think we're abandoned, then we go back to the drink. We go back to drugs. We go back to overspending money. We go back to gossip. We go back to procrastination. We go back to all of those things in our lives. We want to be able to understand that there is no image. There is no thing out there. There is no image out there. The problem with images is this. We have invested the power in the image. The power was never meant to be invested in the image. The power was never meant to be invested in the cross. It was invested in Jesus. The power was never invested in the tree of life. It was invested in the life of Jews. The power was never meant to be invested in the Bodhi tree. It was in the life of Buddha. It was never meant to be invested in the Science of Mind teaching symbol. The power is within us. It's not in any of those things. Now, I don't like the pendulum to swing too far the other way, however. I think images are important in our spiritual life, or can be for some of us. And I think what they do is remind us to listen. They remind us. We have Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva of compassion, back here at a table, and sometimes people come in during the week and they'll just pull up a chair and light a candle, and they'll sit there with Kuan Yin and say a prayer. It's a beautiful way to be reminded to sit still. We have the Blessed Mother, for those of us who are Catholic. We can go in there and pull up a chair and sit with her for a moment and be reminded of the power that is within us through that experience. So I think altars and images are important, but we don't want to get mixed up. We don't want to get confused. The power is in here, not out there. And that's where we want to keep it. Because when we do, we understand we don't need a guru. We don't need a special book on meditation. We don't need any candles or any incense. We need an ability to sit still. And whatever supports us in doing that, we like in our lives. When we do that, we get this. God is with us in our darkest hour. And God is with us in the light. Always. Let's take this message into prayer. Knowing that there is only one power. It's the power of love, and it goes through us. Dancing, dancing, dancing through us to bless the world. So wherever I turn my attention, I know my blessing is going to go. And I turn my attention to those places right now, today, that I know need a bigger blessing. Baton Rouge needs a bigger blessing. Political scene needs a bigger blessing. race relations needs a bigger blessing. And so I turn my attention to those in so many more places. I give thanks. I release this word into the law. Together we say, and so